Hello and welcome to the video for the What Could Your Dung Beetles Be Doing For You session from the Northern Real Farming Conference. Unfortunately, we had a glitch with the original recording of the event, so thankfully we've been able to put together this video in its place, hopefully bringing together the video content shared by our speakers and the discussion at the end. As an introduction to the session, I was the host. I'm Dr. Ali Birkett from Lancaster Environment Centre at Lancaster University, and we had tech support from Rachel Marshall on the conference team, who also works for Food Futures, N8 Agri-Food and Lancaster University. The stars of the show, however, are very much our farmer experts, particularly Sally-Ann Spence and Bruce Thompson, and our northern roaming reporter, Tonia Armer, who shared a video of her experience of looking for dung beetles. So I opened the session with a fairly academic presentation about my research in this area. I'm Ali Birkett. I'm based at Lancaster Environment Centre at Lancaster University. I was trained as a research ecologist, so I had an interest in the natural world, particularly the natural world outside my doorstep as I grew up in Lancashire. And I turned that into a passion originally for research. My job has now moved into more science communications and particularly knowledge exchange between practitioners, farmers, landowners, and the research world. My own PhD research was looking at dung beetles. So this is what brings me to hosting our session today. I was out in the fields in the Peak District in the North Pennines and also in the local area looking at the dung beetles, mostly in my case the ones in sheep dung, but not exclusively. This has always been my favourite dung beetle joke. A dung beetle walks into a bar. Is this stool taken? The image that you see is actually the sort of standard image people think of when they think of a dung beetle. Face down, butt in the air, legs pushing a ball of dung along the ground. This is the image that's often seen in sort of wildlife documentaries and the like. I can't remember what the series was, but lots of people responded to a dung beetle pushing a ball of dung up a sand dune and then back down the sand dune. And that's most people's sort of engagement with dung beetles. I'm always asked, oh, so do we have dung beetles in Britain? And yes. My analogy is always that if we didn't have dung beetles in Britain, your Sunday afternoon stroll through the countryside, through the livestock fields, would be a very different experience, up to your ankles in poo. Essentially, the dung beetles are breaking the poo down, they're taking it away for the benefit of the land, the livestock, and also the walker. There are other animals that are feeding within the dung, various microbes, fungi, worms, all sorts of other things, but dung beetles are doing a lot of the heavy lifting, if I can use that phrase. So let's talk about the dung beetle species in Britain. As I said, these rollers that take the dung a distance away from the original deposit, we don't have any of those. What we do have is the other two types of dung beetle. So that's the tunneler, and they take dung a small distance away from the original deposit and bury it in the ground. And we also have the dweller, and they do their whole life cycle within the dung deposit itself. As you can see, we've got considerably more of the dweller species than we do the tunnelers, but the tunnelers are the big, chunky guys that are moving lots of dung around. In that ball of dung, that's the foods essentially for their young, for their larvae. So whereas the dwellers, they breed and lay their eggs and their larvae grow up in the original deposit, the tunnelers are the ones that are taking it a distance away and burying it in the ground, and they're protecting that food source for their own larvae. That's what the rollers are doing across the savannah. They're making sure that they reduce the competition so that their young get that ball of dung and that's their food source. So here's a couple of examples on my hand of British dung beetle species. One of the big tunneler guys on the left. You can see nicely showing off his wings underneath his hard wing cases. And one of the smaller dwellers on the end of my finger there. These are both British. You can see the size difference. The ones on the left, the tunnelers, essentially sound a bit like a helicopter when they go past. The little dwellers, you wouldn't necessarily notice, but they're there. And if you go rooting about in dung, you will, you know, you've got a pretty good chance of finding them. So that was what I did. I went and did one of the first proper surveys of dung beetles in the Peak District. And I went to 33 different sites, focusing on the sort of upland, moorland areas of the Peak District. 6,640 dung beetles, and I collected at 2 different points in the year. So I collected at August and then in the May. This is when the peak dung beetle sort of adult movement is. So you get species that occur at different times of the year. You get them in, but there are some sort of spring specialists. There are some later in the year specialists. But the way the year works, there are peaks in August and May. Those are the best times to go. And if you go and do a survey at both of those, that's the best chance you get of getting an idea of the full community. So in just the upland, moorland areas of the Peak District, I found 14 different species, which out of our total of 60 doesn't necessarily sound like much, but you are focusing on, you know, on a fairly low intensely grazed system for one thing up there. So I found tunneler species that were mostly lower down, so the lower levels of the Peak District, you're more likely to find them. This species is a sort of large dweller. It's actually a nocturnal species that's a really important food source for the greater horseshoe bat, so it has a conservation importance in itself. I assume it's a big nocturnal species that they can pick out of the air. That's why it's an important source of food. Again, on this map, the darker areas are where it was more common, so you can see it's got a bigger range across the Peak District. And this guy, this is the small dweller species that's mostly found at the tops of hills. So its distribution is almost opposite to the tunneler. It's a cold tolerant species, usually found at the tops of hills. Why do dung beetles matter? Well, their larvae are feeding on the solid bits of your sheep or cow poo, and the adults are feeding on the wet bits. Essentially, this is purely down to mouth parts. The larvae, which look like large grey maggots, really, they have chewing mouth parts, so they can actually feed on the fibrous material. It means that when they've got that source of dung, that ball or, you know, original pat, they can feed there for quite a long time, even as the dung dries out. The adults don't have the chewing mouth parts. It's a morphological thing that happens as they, like butterflies, pupate. Same sort of thing happens with beetles, and they don't have the chewing mouth parts, so they focus on the liquid bits of the dung, which is fine because they can move, they can fly and move between dung pats as the dung pat ages. Whenever I talk to children, they always think that the idea of dung beetle eating the wet bits of dung is disgusting. I've said it so many times I get used to it, but I can see why you get that reaction. We talked about how the dung beetles are removing the dung from the field, reducing pasture fouling, but it's much bigger than that. Their importance in the system is much bigger than that. Just a little schematic, really, of the sorts of things they're involved in. By removing the dung, they're taking the spare nutrients down into the soil, and that's improving the vegetation. They're also digging into the soil, particularly the tunnelers, breaking it open, increasing water infiltration and changing that sort of soil compaction. As we've said, they're a food resource for other things: badgers, bats, crows, the chough, a conservation protected bird. They feed on dung beetles. But one of the biggest things from a farming point of view is that they have a positive impact on your grazing animals because they are taking away the habitat for the parasites. So if the parasites don't have any food, their population reduces, reducing your parasite load for your livestock. So that's a really important role for dung beetles. However, the veterinary treatments that you're giving to your animals that are to kill insects don't just kill parasites, they also kill your dung beetles. So there is an interesting situation here where a dung beetle can be of benefit in itself, to protecting against parasites, but the veterinary treatments that are traditionally given to do that role actually damage the dung beetle population. But there's a question following on from that as to whether the dung beetles will always be around. Will they be able to continue this role? I've given a little bit of suggestion about the role of veterinary treatments in this process. There are lots of other things, and my own research was particularly looking at climate change. So again, from an academic standpoint, but I was looking at the hills, where you have, as we know, cold-loving species are found at the top, warm-loving species are found at the bottom. But as climate change happens, the boundary between those two will move. So what effect was that having on dung beetles? And so I went out to Moorhouse in the North Pennines. Here you see me in the snow. I will say I wasn't out in the snow that often, but there I was looking at the dung beetle community and the distribution of different species. So I made use of a study from the 50s and looked at how a particular dung beetle is distributed across the hillside. So this is Leponum. This is that species that I was talking about before, the cold-loving, top of the hill dwelling species. And in the 50s, the black circles show you that it spread quite a long way over that hillside. So we went back and we did survey in 2008 and again in 2013 and looked to see how that dung beetle had moved. We did the same sampling method and everything. And it had moved 132 metres uphill by 2008. And then by 2013, that was 177 metres. So the bottom end of its range had retreated uphill. And that tied really closely in with the climate data that's collected from the same site. So although you can never say cause and effect, there's a very close link between how that retreat has happened and the warming climate, which suggests that that dung beetle is moving uphill. And what effect is that having on the community? As we've said, if he's moving uphill, are the warm-loving, say, tunneler species from the bottom moving in to take its place? Again, we repeated a study at a particular site, and yes, the community is changing. But what we don't know at the moment is how that change in species will have an impact on the ecosystem. Does it have an impact on the functions that these beetles are providing in the soil, in the grazing, all of those sorts of things? So that's work that very much is still to be explored. So a little summary of this academic presentation before we move on to the really exciting farmer in the field stuff. So we do have dung beetles in Britain, about 60 species, tunnelers and dwellers. And what you want for a healthy system is a mixture of the two. And they're really important to the system because they're breaking down the dung, they're reducing parasite load, returning nutrients to the soil, reducing soil compaction, improving water infiltration and providing food for other animals. So the dung beetles are really important in the system, and hopefully now we'll move on to talk about on the farm what they're directly doing for farmers and what the farmers are directly doing for them to help to protect them. Thank you very much. Then we came to Sally-Ann Spence. Sally-Ann is a fellow of both the Royal Entomological Society and the Linnaean Society, and an honorary associate at the Oxford University Museum of Natural History. She specialises in dung beetles and pastureland biodiversity, and founded the UK Dung Beetle Mapping Project, accumulating species data. Her work on the project has seen her surveying field sites all over the UK, including many outlying islands, enabling her to study a multitude of grazing systems. This practical experience has been translated into collaborative projects, working on sustainable land management plans within the farming community to promote dung beetles as important bioindicators for soil and pasture and livestock health. She owns and runs an educational research centre, Berrycroft Hub, based on her family farm, where she keeps PLFA accredited livestock and manages all the grassland. As a passionate advocate for British farming and biodiversity, Sally-Ann does a great deal of science public engagement outreach, both at her centre on her farm and at various events, and on all media platforms, including television. As you'll see, though, Sally-Ann is also a very passionate farmer in her own right. So now we go to the video of her showing us around her own farm and the dung beetles she finds there.
Hi is what's coming out of those animals. So this is some dung here. We had some rain quite recently, and as a result my dung pats are very, very wet. But we're going to be looking at these in a bit more detail because I'm very interested in dung beetles, and that's what I'm going to be talking to you about today. So this dung pat here is a little bit too wet. It's very, very fresh. It's only just come from the cow itself, and we haven't got any life in it yet, but very soon this will be colonised by an entire ecosystem of invertebrates, and they will start to break it down and get rid of it and recycle those nutrients. So that's excellent because that stops pasture fouling. I don't want pasture fouling. No farmer wants pasture fouling because obviously that reduces the amount of grazing that you've got for your animals. If this caps with the sun and the wind, it can actually ferment and continue to ferment underneath that cap without the dung beetles breaking it down. And if that happens, it's producing methane, which is one of our greenhouse gases. So we don't want that happening either. I also want the nutrients of this released into the soil. And that's really important so the plants can take it up and we can actually have better grazing as a result. So the dung beetles do that. They make tunnels. Some of them make tunnels underneath, and that actually allows air into the soil and it allows water filtration. So really good for soil health. Also, it keeps going, this is a great list for dung beetles. Also, you're going to have dung beetles that are in here and they're increasing the biodiversity of your grazing. So dung beetles are eaten by lots of other things. So that's great because that's great for your bats and for all the other creatures that you've got that will eat them. You will also find that dung beetles, I'm going to keep saying my list of wonderful things for dung beetles. The other thing that dung beetles do is they will remove the dung. And as they remove the dung, they're removing the habitat that is used by a lot of parasites in your livestock. So you've got parasites that pass through the livestock, come out in the dung, and they continue their life cycle in the dung, and then they migrate into the grass to be ingested by your cows again. If the dung beetles have broken that dung down, those parasites cannot continue with their life cycle, so it actually helps to buffer the parasite burden in your animals. So there's lots going on that's brilliant for dung beetles, and I want to look and show you a lot more about them, which is what we're going to be doing in a minute. So you get different species of dung beetle that actually live in different areas as well. So I've got woodland over the other side, and I'm going to get a different group of species in the woodland than I'll get out here in the full sun in this grassland. What I'm looking at here is a dung pat that's been broken down by one of our biggest in size species of dung beetles, the door beetles, and there's 8 species in this group. And you can see here the dung pat, and if I actually lift it up, it's just a crust. Look at that, it's gone. The dung pat is completely gone. That's just a crust, and that will just weather away without a problem. So that's excellent. Look at that, amazing. So the next thing you will see is a hole, and I think you can just see a hole here, which I can easily get my finger in. And there's another hole just here as well. Again, I can really easily get my finger in. They're quite large, and a telltale sign is also these piles of soil. There's a pile of soil here and a pile of soil here. And that's because the group of beetles, the geotrupids, the big beetles that live in these tunnels underneath the dung, they're actually tunneling their way down and they're producing these piles of soil. So that's what that's all about. I could dig them out, and to do that I could use a trowel or probably a spade, and I can see that the hole is here. These dung beetles will make a tunnel down. They can go up to 1 metre in depth, okay? So that really is quite an impact on your pasture if you think that's going on all around me. And that they will make a tunnel, and then off the tunnel they have chambers, and in those chambers they make brood balls of the dung. They've pulled it down, and they'll lay their egg and have their larvae on it, and the larvae will also go into pupation in those chambers, and then they'll emerge a bit later on. So if I wanted to dig it out to actually see where the dung beetle is and what type of dung beetle it is, I would be bringing my spade about here. So the hole is here, and I'm bringing my spade well back because I don't want to actually dig through the dung beetle itself or disturb it. Now, it's a bit late in the season, and I don't want to disturb these dung beetles because the chances are that there's already larvae feeding on those dung balls in the chambers, the brood balls. But I have dug up one from another field. I'm just going to take my hands off, well, from the other side of this field actually. There's 2 fields here we're running together, so that you can see the size of these dung beetles. And there's one there. So it's got clubbed antenna. That's very typical of the whole of this species, or whole of this group of beetles, so they can smell the dung. They can fly. These guys fly at night mainly. That is a big beetle. You can see it's got really strong front legs, and if I put my hand like that, it'll probably try and squeeze its way through my fingers. Really strong, pushing its way through there to get out. And these guys can really shift some soil, and they can get through quite compacted soil as well. You see it pushing its way through. They have little mites on them. All the dung beetles, you will find mites on them, little tiny pink mites, and they're phoretic mites. They're not harming the beetle, they're actually using the beetle as a taxi so that they can drop off in the dung because they're too small to travel themselves between pats, and they will hunt out and eat fly eggs, and fly maggots. So they are really good for you as well. So there's your dung beetle. There's 8 species in this group. Really big beetles, really chunky, really capable of doing some great things for your pasture and shifting that dung. This is one of the easiest ways to find dung beetles. What I'm doing here is I'm using a tray, a white tray. You could use a cat litter tray. You could use even something like this container split in half here. As long as it's white, that's ideal because it shows you where all the insects are. You can easily spot them. Now I'm going to add some water. In it goes. And in a minute I'm going to break that dung up. I've got gloves on for biosecurity for the livestock and also for personal hygiene for me. Right, I'm going to break that up. Now immediately I've got lots and lots of things that come to the surface, and I've got dung beetles. So these are come on, put you in my hand like that. Right, so we've got a load of dung beetles here. What I'm really interested in is the frequency of the population as well. How many dung beetles there are in this pat. So I'm just going to make sure you put you out here. These are going to be members of the Aphrodine group. And that's not surprising because there's 46 species in that group, so they're the ones you're going to find more of than anything else, and they're dwellers. They live in the dung rather than under it. So you can see there's plenty of dung beetles here. You get different emergencies at different times of the year, and at the moment we're getting a lot of spaculatus and prodomus, so you will see those species in particular. Don't panic if you can't identify to species level. Just take a really good clear photograph above and underneath and put it on iRecord. That would be amazing. I'm going to have to not just check here in this part of the field because it's quite sunny here. I've also got woodland over the other side, so I will go and sample in the woodland as well. I'm most likely to find different species in there. So it's really important as a farmer that I have a mixture of dung beetle species here. The more dung beetles I have, they're living in the dung at different stages of decomposition, and they're breaking it down all year round because you get different species at different times of the year. I'll also get different species out here in the sunlight as I will up in the woodland. So you get a whole host of species, and it's that diversity that does the ecosystem services that we need as farmers. Now, you get different species in different groups. 3 groups of dung beetles. We have the tunnelers, the ones that live under it, that's 2 groups. The Onthophagus and the Geotrupids. And in the Geotrupids you have your biggest dung beetles, which I'm going to show you one of those now. They're quite big, they're really shifting some dung because they're quite big in size. And there's 8 species in this group. You have the Onthophagus, of which I don't have one at the moment, I'm really sorry, but they are the smaller, round, scarab-like beetles. So they are true scarabs. If you think of the Egyptian scarabs, that's the sort of shape they are, but much smaller because we're Northern Hemisphere. And there's 6 species in that group. They live underneath as well. And then you've got the Aphrodines, and there's 46 species in this group, so you're more likely to find ones in this group. And they can vary in size from Fossa and Rufopes are about this size to Granaras and smaller ones which are only a couple of millimetres long. So it's that group, that diversity of dung beetles that are coming into the dung at different stages of decomposition all over the farm. Think of microhabitats within the field. The field is one big habitat. These guys are coming into those microhabitats, each dung pat, and they are moving that dung really quickly and doing all those ecosystem services. So you need a mixture of species, and that's the important thing. Some of these species are specialists, some of them are generalists, so you'll see some more than others. The specialists are the ones that are really struggling as well because of things like soil disturbance, livestock removal, and the use of insecticides, avermectins and things in our treatments. So what you want to break the dung down, release all those nutrients, do all those other things, is a mixture of dung beetles right across the board. So I'm sat down by a dung pat here in my grassland, and this dung pat isn't ideal for dung beetles. We've had a little bit of rain, believe it or not, in this bright sunny day I've got today, but that means that the dung pat is a little bit wetter, so it formed as more of a splatter. It's not a bad dung pat though. ideal dung pad is a bit taller. It has ridges and furrows, things where the dung beetles can easily get in. A little bit dry. There's a dung beetle just landed, in fact, on it right now. But it doesn't want to be a splatter, the sort of dairy cow wet splatter that you get in the grass. The dung beetles can't actually breed in that. They can drown in it. They're not protected from predators in it. It's not ideal for them. They really want something a bit more formed like this. The adult dung beetles are sort of mashing and sucking all the moisture, if you like, all their nutrients they're getting from the wetness in the dung, whereas the larvae are often eating the more solid dung. So, you know, it's a whole different ways of consuming the dung as well. This is a really important thing with this dung here, and that is that this grassland was improved at one point. It was having nitrogens on it, artificial fertilisers, and we aren't able to do that in the environmental scheme that it's now in, and I don't particularly want to, because what I'm trying to do here is increase the biodiversity of the flora as well as the invertebrates and the mammals and everything else as well, alongside producing really good beef and lamb. So what we've done here is we've stopped putting artificial fertilisers on, and we're also monitoring how much of treatments, insecticidal treatments that we're giving our livestock. If they don't need it, they don't get it. You can fish leg count, you can do blood tests, you can do various things to monitor your animals. You know, think about how you're breeding from your animals as well. We look at how their feet are, say in sheep, whether they've got problems with their feet and whether we breed from that ram or not. Start thinking about natural parasite burdens as well. If you're breeding from animals that have a naturally high parasite threshold, you are probably going to increase the chances of that. You're going to increase your chances of using various different treatments as well. And you want to avoid that, because any form of parasite treatment in livestock is an insecticide, and it will have detrimental effects on the dung beetles. Now, that could be in their ability to navigate, it could be in their ability to breed, their ability to grow. It could be actually so toxic in the dung that it can actually kill them outright. So, you know, this is something that we have to think about. We don't chain harrow, we don't plough these fields. There's no disturbance for the dung beetles that have got their larvae and are living underneath the dung, as well as the ones that live in it. So you can see here what we've done is we've really been careful on the animals that get treatment. No animal in this field, there's 70 acres here, and no animal in this field is treated. All the animals that need treated are done on an individual basis, and they are removed off this grazing. Now, that's left me with a dung community over the last 15 years that has grown huge. You can see this, I don't know if you can see actually, but there's lots of little tiny wasps and flies, parasitic wasps on here as well. They'll go in and lay their eggs on things inside the dung. If I actually open up the crust on this dung, you can see it's moving with things. So we've got hydrophiliids. These really round, very fast beetles are hydrophiliids. I'll see if I can find one. We've got staphylids, the rove beetles. I'm trying to find one quickly. Let's see if I can find one. There might be one in there. There is, I think, one in there. We'll see if it runs out. Nope, somewhere in there. Can't find it now, but we'll see if we can find a hydrophiliid. Let's knock this out. So you can see, look at all the insects coming off this. You see it's moving in there again. There. Now that's a staphylid. That's a rove beetle. Lots of different species live in dung, and they are carnivorous. So that's eating other insects, fly eggs, fly maggots, all sorts of different things like that. This is a hydrophiliid. So it's a dung water beetle. There's another species there. They've adapted to live in the dung as well. And their larvae are real good predators of fly eggs and fly maggots. More staphylids, different species in here. You can see, let's see if we can find a dung beetle. We'll easily be able to find a dung beetle. I've just got to move it across. It shouldn't smell too bad. If you've got dung beetles and things, breaking it down, that gets rid of the smell as well. You can see these are dung beetles. If I can get one there. It's very difficult, my gloves on, but with these, we have got dung beetles. You'll see them as they move just down here. These are dung beetles. They're dwellers. They're a species that live in the dung. Another hydrophiliid. There's lots of different things. So this is a whole community that has increased in my field since I've been being really careful about treating animals on this pasture land, and also it's helped a lot of other things. The dung's breaking down very quickly. My soil is less compacted. We're getting a better quality grazing. I mean, this is calcareous grassland full of tall grass, and you know, I'm looking to improve my grazing. So this has been helping a lot with that. And we're also getting a massive increase in floral species. So, you know, this is a whole ecosystem. It's a very healthy ecosystem, and it's going on with these dung beetles. Where you have dung beetles in pats like this, their activity is actually a draw to earthworms. So the more dung beetles you have, the more earthworm activity you have, the more things like Calamboda, the springtails, soil invertebrates, all these different things are happening because the system is working. And as a result, you get healthy soils, healthy pasture, and healthy livestock. Different ways that you can sample your dung in the field to find out what dung beetles you've got, if you've got any. So what I'm doing is I'm just going to put my gloves on for personal hygiene reasons, and also for the biosecurity of the livestock, especially when I go from one farm to another. Right, we're going to do some dry sampling. So for this reason, I'm going to be taking up some dung, just picking it up off the floor. It's quite dry, different age dung. Just keep collecting a few samples, a bit more here. A bit wetter, that dung. And I'm going to bring it over, and I'm actually going to sieve it. So, actually that's a little bit wetter, that one. I'm going to put that one there. So, what I'm doing now is just sifting through the dung. This is just a sieve from a garden centre that you can get for making your compost or something like that with. No need to have anything really expensive to do all this sort of thing. This is an entomology tray, but you can just use a cat litter tray or just anything. Basically, so long as it's white or a very light colour, you can see what insects are falling through, and that enables you to ID or identify what you've got. Now, I don't expect anyone to identify to species level, and it is actually quite hard in dung beetles, so please don't beat yourself up if you can't get to species level. That's okay. We're going to talk about the species in a minute, but I'm just going to go through here. So I've sieved some of the dung, and let's have a look. If you come and have a look a bit closer, you will see it's actually beginning to move with insects. And I'm just going to show you what we've got. So I've got some spiders in here. I've got some little beetles. You get lots of different things that live in dung, not just your dung beetles. There's all sorts. Let's have a look. Oh, here's a dung beetle. That is one of our dung beetles just there. He's going to play dead, death feigning. It's quite a good way to avoid predation. Got another one. I think it's quite windy, so it's blowing them all away. But I have got another dung beetle I saw a minute ago. Ah, here's one here. So this is one way of finding out what you've actually got in your dung. That's a dung beetle. You don't just get dung beetles in your dung. This beetle here is a hysterid, and that actually goes round and eats other things like fly eggs, fly maggots, that sort of thing. Occasionally the odd dung beetle. So he's quite good at keeping your pest species down in your flies. He's going to fly off. Then you have, what else we got? We've got staphylids, which are long rove beetles. There's another dung beetle here, another one here. They again are predatory. You get hydrophiliids in your dung. These are water beetles that have adapted to live in dung. Again, their larvae eat fly eggs and fly maggots, so they're useful for you as well. But we've got some dung beetles, that's the main thing. So that's one way of checking what you've got. You really want that mixture of insects in your dung. You want the predators, you want the herbivores like the dung beetles, lots of different things going on in your dung. The more diversity you have of life in your dung, the quicker your dung pats are breaking down and they're supporting a bigger biodiversity in the whole of your pasture land. I'm going to now do another way of checking your dung. So I've just put some sheep dung in this tray. Again, I've gone for an entomological tray, but you can just use a cat litter tray or anything that's white. You know, even cut off one of these containers in half and use that, because it's a case of having that white that enables you to find those insects and pick them out. And this is a flotation way of doing it. I'm actually going to add water to my dung. This is a remarkably simple way, because quite simply, dung beetles can't hold their breath forever, and they are going to come to the surface if you add water. Now this is a way of finding absolutely everything in the dung, because everything is going to come to the surface. So I'm just going to quite carefully break this up. And you can see straight away, if you come in a bit closer, you'll be able to see on this, that the dung beetles here have come to the surface. So I can actually put my hand in now and scoop them up. So rather than seeing one or two individuals, I'm now actually getting a population frequency. And that's really, really important, because the frequency of the beetles tell us how healthy that population is. So you can see through here, I'm picking up quite a lot of dung beetles now coming out of the dung, far more than when I was sieving actually. So it's giving a far better indication, in this case, of how many dung beetles I've got in the dung. So I'm going to pick them all out. I don't want to leave them in the water because they will drown, and obviously these insects are key to your pasture health and the dung being broken down, so you certainly don't want to harm them in any way. But you can see now I've got quite a good handful of dung beetles coming out of the water. So we've got quite a good population. So a good population means excellent pasture health.
So thank you very much to Sally-Ann for that brilliant video. Loads of questions have been coming in while we've been going along, so we'll try and address some of those now, the ones that are specifically what you were talking about, Sally-Ann. There's various questions about you using whether you're using a holistic management system or an intensive management system, and those sorts of things. I will definitely let you answer that one.
Right, so I'm actually on a conventional arable farm, which is the main farm business here, and we have areas on the farm that haven't been able to be ploughed up due to the topography and geology of those sites. So those are the sites that I'm grazing. So I've got just over 100 acres at present that I'm grazing, and what I do is I need to make a profit. That's unfortunately that's the fact of life. But I'm trying to increase the diversity of my dung fauna, which increases my soil biodiversity, as well as everything else. And the system then becomes a healthy system, and it sort of self-replicates and it settles out. And you find it at the very beginning of the whole of the research, because I've been running this as a research project now for quite some time. And I was taking on grassland that was improved where they could reach with a fertilizer spreader, basically. And they were using this ground to finish off young stock, dairy stock, and occasionally beef animals, but mainly young heifers and things from the dairy industry. So when I took it on, all those applications were stopped, and I was reduced to grassland that hadn't got that dung community. And that the animals I was putting on there, I had to think carefully about. That's the other thing. This ground isn't going to support your continental beef animals and things. I don't have the facility of a barn on this farm. The barns here are grain stores. So I have to think about my livestock that's going to be suitable for those areas. And therefore, I was looking at animals that are native breeds. In this case, belted Galloways and Dexters and the Wiltshire Horns and Cleans. The reason that we started with Dexters is because they were nice and small, and I could actually put quite a lot on the grassland. The dung from your native species, or your native breeds of livestock, are actually better for your native breeds species, of dung insects, because they have been with us since the Neolithic time and before, and basically they are adapted to the dung from those animals more so than if you bring in another type of animal. So it's a bit like if I go to check dung beetles in a field that's got something like the belted Galloways in, I'm going to find lots of, hopefully, a good variety of species. If I go to the Cotswold Wildlife Park up the road and I go through elephant dung or rhinoceros dung, I'm going to find just a couple of generalists, because our dung beetles haven't been able to digest and will not be naturally attracted to that type of dung. So I increased my dung community immediately by putting native animals on board. And when you increase the community, you are increasing the whole of the system. The quicker the system works, which is what I've got now, is that my dung in the summer, especially, and certainly when I have peak emergence times of certain species in huge numbers, the dung is broken down in 24 hours in some cases, which is a phenomenally quick time. So quick that I struggle to take students out there to find dung sometimes. And that's optimum. And that's what I'm after. Obviously, that's not always the same throughout the year, but we have dung beetles active throughout the year. So what I'm trying to do is I mix my breeds up. I've gone for something like Wiltshire Horns when I did the sheep, because this is an area prone to fly strike. And of course, one of the long-acting treatments that you put on your animals like crowbeck and things is to prevent fly strike. So I've taken or tried to take that out of the equation, and I put animals on the ground that don't have a fleece. I then found from a profitable point of view, Wiltshire Horns for me weren't producing a lot of lambs, and they were taking longer to finish, which is why I bought the clean in to cross with the Wiltshire Horns, but to keep the fleece off them. So they're like an easy care sheep, if you like. But by taking out the fly strike option, I was able to reduce what treatments I was putting on. I do have to treat my lambs. I have tried not treating lambs, and I have had troubles with parasites. We have Homuncus contortus and other things here as well. So the lambs are taken, when at weaning, they are taken away from those sites. They're put in one particular pasture, which I consider my write-off paddock, and they're treated there. When I'm looking at breeding animals, I'm looking at the individual natural parasite burden of those animals. If I've got an animal that is always going to need treatment, seems to permanently have an issue about parasites, she will be, she or he, depending, because I keep an in-house flock as well, and I will monitor them. And if I think that they've got quite a high threshold, basically I'm very careful about what I breed from. I would consider parasite burden just as important as things like foot rot and things. In fact, probably more so in my case, because I want to not do the treatments on the ground as much as possible. And that enables me to build up this incredibly healthy system. And now the system is working naturally. So my grass is actually really good quality, considering it's not getting any artificial fertilizers or anything, because the soil is healthy. So the grass is healthy, the animals are healthy, and so on and so forth. So it's about creating that system. And to be able to create that system, yeah, the biggest problem you have is what treatments you put on, because any insecticide treatment, which is what your parasite treatments are going to have a detrimental effect on the invertebrates, which are your dung beetles and the rest of that community, but especially your dung beetles, because they are the ones eating the dung. So it is a holistical approach, but I don't want people to think that I'm playing with a few animals on a hillside. I'm very much out there to make a product as well, because I can't talk to you guys or anybody else and say, look, this is what you should do for biodiversity. It's awesome. And you say, well, that's great, but how do I pay the rent next month? And I say, well, I don't know whether you're going to make it on that front, because you can only run 3 or 4 animals on 40 acres. You have to make your end product, and that's how it is. But you can do it in a way that is better for the environment and better in the long term for your animals. And that's the important part about the whole thing. You have to be selective, and you have to be understanding of what animals you put where, what breeds you put where as well, and that will be dictated by your land. And actually, your dung fauna natural to that area will be suitable for those type of animals. If you put more native animals on a really rough bit of ground, you're going to be more likely to attract the right type of insects and things that you need in your dung. So the system will kick on. So it's about thinking of things like that. Think about what your animals you're doing, how you're treating, how you can avoid putting treatments on that ground. If you have to treat on an individual basis, all this sort of thing. So it is a system that can work in any system, whether it's organic, whether it's conventional, whether you want to go for more animals. You're going to be natural effects on your pasture. If you heavily, intensively graze somewhere, you're not going to get the output anyway on the whole, because if you can't put all extra things in. Whereas if you graze sympathetically with your numbers, you will work correctly with your dung community, the whole system will work. So at the moment, I've had it very, very dry, and believe it or not, up on the top of the calcareous grassland, I've got very little soil up there, and I've got a very diverse grassland, but it's chalk grassland. So at the moment, I have got one field in particular, which is 60 acres, and on it I'm running 6 finishing steers and 18 rams, which is not heavily stocked. However, on the lower fields where I've got a lot more grass at the moment, they've been doing really well. They're on clay soils. The grass has been holding really, really well, and I've actually got quite a high stocking density on those fields. So it's every year's different. Every part of the year is different within that year because of we can't, you know, there's lots going on with the weather, there's lots of other factors. So it's about just being sympathetic to the ground as well, and you will find it will all kick in. But it is based around the dung beetles. They are the key.
So a quick question. You were asked about whether you, how you manage your slurry and manure in your system. Do you manage it? Is it just left out in the field? That kind of thing, which slightly ties in from a question about what happens to the dung beetles in the winter, which I know Bruce will cover slightly in his video, but perhaps you could touch on the manure slurry side of things very quickly.
Okay, so very, very quickly, I don't keep any animals indoors, so I don't produce the muck heap. Where you can get the odd species of dung beetle in the muck heap, but they're a very different group in many respects to what you want in the grassland, because those dung beetles that you want in your grassland for your pasture ecology and soil health and everything are only in the dung pat. That's their microhabitat. The minute you move that, and it's with other dung pats, you change the temperature, the matrix and everything else and make it uninhabitable for them. So I don't produce the dung, and if I did, I wouldn't actually get the dung beetles I need in that. And if you spread that dung on the field, you won't get the dung beetles in it again, because you've changed the temperature, you've changed the matrix, and you've changed the whole feel of the dung. And slurry, again, I'm all outdoors, all extensive outdoors, so I don't produce the slurry on the farm here. If you did produce slurry, again, you won't get your dung beetles in it, and when you put it out in the field, it won't help them.
There are lots of questions, but I'm aware we've got some more videos to get to. So perhaps if we go on to Bruce's video now, and then we can come back to more of the questions, because they will.
Is Bruce going to introduce it, or just show the video?
Oh, sorry, I forgot. We haven't introduced Bruce at all. My apologies, Bruce.
And there's two of them here, so.
Yes, another active farmer across the water in Ireland. I don't know if you've got any better weather than we do here, Bruce. But Bruce is a Nuffield scholar working in a conventional dairy system with dung beetles, and feel free to introduce yourself before we start the video.
Okay, yeah, my name is Bruce Thompson. I'm a dairy farmer right in the centre of Ireland, a place called Portlaoise. And yeah, I suppose I've seen a lot of changes in dairy in a short space of time, with particularly with the abolition of milk quotas. And I have noticed that the intensive type of system has a huge impact on the environment. That can be positive or negative. So we need to be very careful what we're doing in an intensive system, giving it what's at stake. So with that in mind, I noticed that anomintic resistance is becoming an issue in Ireland and the UK. By anomintic resistance, I mean that is the wormers that we're using on our animals are becoming less effective. So the parasites are becoming resistant to these products. So we've only 3 products that can be used in cattle and cows, and there's 5 products for the sheep. And there's resistance to all 3 products in cows and sheep, and there's resistance to, I think it's 4 out of 5 of the products in sheep as well. So that's becoming more and more prevalent, and is going to be a big issue, because there's no work being carried out on new products. It's incredibly expensive for the pharmaceutical companies to produce new products. So we're going to have to work with what we got. So we spent a generation, 2 generations, looking at controlling parasites within animals themselves. But now we kind of need to start looking at the free living stage. And by that, I mean that's when the parasites are in the dung pats, and that's where our dung beetles come in. So as I'm in an intensive system, trying to incorporate creatures like dung beetles into the type of farming system that we have, encouraging them and making sure we're not damaging the environment in the process is all the challenges that we're trying to address. And yeah, with that in mind, I applied for a Nuffield scholarship. So I'm halfway through researching on that now at the moment. So yeah, I'll let the video speak some more on it there. So yeah, we can roll it there now if we want. Roll it there, Rachel.
Hello everyone and welcome to my farm in Ireland. My name is Bruce Thompson and I am a real farmer. We are operating a spring block calving grass-based production system. It could be defined as being intensive. I could talk about cows until they come home, but what I really want to talk about today is a clean-up crew that come into the paddock when the cows have left. My herd of 250 cows finished grazing this paddock yesterday, leaving behind them over 5 tonnes of cow poo. Sitting on top of the ground like this, they could be seen as a noxious weed, impeding grass growth, and they're a great home and breeding ground for flies and parasites. However, they are also an important nutrient source for grasses. However, they're not going to do much good in that state. So, this is when these guys come in. These guys consume the pats, burying it at the roots of the grass, along with all the parasites and fly eggs. The cow pat then is an important nutrient for grass growth, and it's taken away off at the top of the soil, leaving more room for grass to grow. Okay, so this little guy is called Fosser, Aphodius Fosser. I just caught him in one of my traps, and you can see he's quite young because if you look at what we call his tibia, which are his front feet, he has little spikes on it, and his feet are quite long. As they get old and start digging and rooting, they actually wear down. So this guy is quite young. As some animal remedies have an adverse effects on dung beetle populations, we are using a more diagnostic approach when it comes to selecting when and what needs to be used. So we've gotten all sciencey. To reduce the need for wormers, we like to build up the animal's immune system when they're young. These are the most vulnerable animals on our farm. These are the young stock. Using our own mapping system, we allocate the least burdened pastures to the most vulnerable stock. These animals are kept moved regularly, so we invest in portable equipment such as this trough, feeder, fencing. These calves are given a small break of grass and they're moved regularly. This reduces the need for wormers in these animals and builds up their own natural resistance. This will stand for them for life. For fly control, we have moved away from using synthetic insecticides. We've been getting very good results on these young heifers here using Stockholm tar and eucalyptus oil. Another area we focus on is habitat, and by that I mean cow poo. You see, as we close our paddocks off in the autumn, leaving them rest until the springtime, our cows are not out depositing food for these dung beetles. The issue with this is, as they emerge in the autumn and the winter time, they have no food and no homes. Some of them will literally starve to death. So what we do over the winter time, we let out a few animals. It doesn't take a lot. They can go out full, they can be full before they leave the sheds. Let out 5 or 6 animals across the whole field like this for an afternoon, and they'll leave just enough for these dung beetles to survive. The more cows, the more dung pats. The more dung pats, the more dung beetles. Dung beetles are preyed on by badgers, foxes, small birds and bats. Small birds and bats are then eaten by large birds such as the buzzards that we have on our farm. This is ecology. With the benefits that dung beetles bring to agriculture as my subject, I received a Nuffield scholarship, and as part of this scholarship I am collecting beetles and placing them into these enclosures here. The idea is that I collect different species, increase their populations and release them onto my farm to increase diversity. The result? Well, as our herd has increased with the abolition of milk quotas, our wormer usage has decreased by 90%. We have also seen an elimination of liver fluke, which was a serious problem on this farm. I'm giving that credit to the dung beetles. Thank you so much for visiting my farm. Please ask plenty of questions.
So Bruce clearly has a separate career going in filmmaking, I think, out of all of that. So a general question that I've noticed coming up was about whether you get the tunneler beetles under sheep poo as well as cow poo, and we are talking quite a lot about cow poo in this, partly because it's easier to see, but yes, you do get tunnelers and dwellers in sheep poo. All of my research was on sheep poo, and so all of those species collected in the Peak District were found under sheep poo. You get some species that are specialist on sheep poo, you get some that are specialist on cow, you get some on horse, you even get some on rabbit. How they find enough food, I have no idea, because a rabbit pellet's tiny. But yeah, you get specialists, and then you get generalists that go to all sorts of species. You also get some that prefer old deposits, so some that will arrive, after the pat's been there for a while. You get some that come in quite early. So there's a whole range of species, which is why the diversity is what's really important on a farm. A question specifically for Bruce. For the young stock, how do you know which are your least vulnerable pastures for worms?
Okay, well, it's we could get. Can you hear me? Sorry, I'm unmuted. I am. Yeah. Okay. Just doing an acoustics check there. Yeah. So sorry about that. Yeah. We're assuming. I suppose there's quite a lot of it based on assumption. That as the young stock are the most vulnerable, they are seen as parasite factories. So as they move around the farm, as they're picking up parasites, the parasites are multiplying at a much greater rate coming out of the back end of the young stock than it would be with say the cows, for example. So the dirtiest paddocks on the farm are going to be the paddocks that the calves last grazed. So what we do is, as the calves move around the farm, we mark a paddock behind them orange. We use what we call a traffic light grazing system. The calf's paddock, the paddock grazed by the calf is marked orange, unless we, through a fecal egg count, find that the calves have crossed the threshold of 250 eggs per gram. At that point, we will mark the paddock red, and the calves go for treatment at that stage, but not until then. And to change it from orange then to green, what we do is we put in either cows into it to graze the paddock out, or we cut bales of silage off it, or overwinter it. So it goes up one step at a time, or down one step at a time. We could complicate it a bit further and link it to fecal egg counting in pats with each field. It's something we're considering for next year. So that's how we aim the fields. In relation to liver fluke, then we would also identify the fields that have the mud snail in them, and the young stock to stay away from those fields altogether. Now, that said, we don't want the calves, particularly after dosing them, in terms of animintic resistance, we don't want to be moving them onto the cleanest field possible, because we're leaving a vacuum there for the calves to pick up resistant parasites to thrive. So what we're doing then is we're putting the calves onto an orange paddock post drenching, if that makes sense. So we're actually putting a certain challenge on the calves to fight these parasites. But it has given us a good reduction in parasite loading over a period of time. So that's basically how we manage the young stock.
Yeah, so there's quite a few questions coming in specifically about liver fluke. How do you think that the dung beetles are reducing the larvae? Where was the other one? Do you think they'd help to eliminate fluke for sheep which are outwintered? Questions like that.
Yeah, I suppose I'm kind of it's in that regard. It's probably a bit of guesswork as to why they've reduced. Have we less mud snails due to there being more carrion beetles on the farm? Because we know that certain beetles eat snails. I'm sure maybe Sally-Ann might elaborate on that. Is it that they're taking the parasite out when it's in the free living stage in the feces, or is it a combination of the two? I'm not really sure, but it's definitely we would always do the PCR testing on the milk in the bulk tank, and it was always reading high when we were back using quite a lot of animintics, but it is now reading negative altogether, completely negative. So it has gone. We haven't given the cows any animintics since 2017 was the last time we gave the cows anything. So yeah, no issues there.
Perhaps at this point we should move to our local Cumbrian reporter. So we were aware when we were putting this together that this is the Northern Real Farming Conference, and so far you've seen a boring academic, a site in Wiltshire and a site in Ireland, so we should probably go to the north. So Tonia Armer, who is a farmer in Cumbria, very kindly offered to go and do a dung beetle search for us on her land. We had thought about doing it sort of live, decided that technologically that wasn't going to work, and seeing as it's chucking it down, I'm really glad we decided on that. So Tonia, perhaps if you give us a little bit of an introduction to your farm, and then we play your video of you going as someone that's not experienced looking for dung beetles and going and investigating what was on your farm.
Okay, well, I do feel like a complete amateur in amongst a lot of professionals. I've never even looked for a dung beetle till earlier this week. I've noticed our cowpats are always turned over very quickly by badgers, and wondered what they were looking for. Anyway, I'm involved with a 200-acre farm on the edge of the Lake District near Kendal. We have cows and sheep, sucklers, limmies and simmentals, and also the sheep are warbles and mules. The land is very wet. We have a lot of rainfall. I was really impressed with the very dry cow parts that Sally-Ann was showing us. We never have ones you can grate. We are, did I say it's acid grassland and less favoured area, or part of it, most of it is less favoured area. It's a conventional farm. I've infiltrated it a bit, and we have 2 meadows that are old-fashioned and species-rich meadows, and some nice pasture, but apart from that, it's just conventional silage, and the cows are overwintered inside, and the slurry is spread on the land. I think that is about it, really, unless there is any questions.
If we run the video and then see if there's any questions after it. But this is Tonia's first real experience of going and looking with some enthusiastic helpers, I think.
So the cattle have been off this pasture for about 2.5 weeks, so I thought that would be ideal to come and find some cowpats and some dung beetles. But so this is what the badgers have done to all the cowpats. I'm thinking from this there must be some beetles or larvae of some kind in the dung for them to go to so much trouble to dig them up. Should we have a look and see if there is anything else underneath? See if there is any beetles.
See if there's any ants.
Ants?
Yeah.
Who knows?
Doesn't seem to be anything.
Maybe it's
bit
too
dry.
fresh. Yeah.
Oh,
Oh, come on, have a look at
look,
this.
Ellie
then.
found some maggots.
I wonder if those are dung beetle maggots.
Are you coming out? Can I poke it with your stick? Right, so would you like me to give it a poke and then a peel?
Yes.
Right, you give it a poke. Oh, yeah, it definitely goes in. There you go. There's lots of little flies.
It's a bit smelly.
It is.
We probably don't need that much, do we? Do we need to dig?
I don't know.
Do we put it in?
Right in the bucket.
I do the hole. I do the hole down.
No, do we just give it a swish?
Yeah, maybe it's too fresh again. I think they need to be.
It looks quite fresh, that
Yeah,
doesn't it?
there is no beetles coming out, is there?
Oh, what's that?
Oh.
There's something.
Is it?
Yeah.
What do you want to see?
It's at the side.
Oh, we were not putting the muck in there.
That's the beetles out there.
Oh.
It's, I'll pop it in. Sorry, little beetle.
Where's the beetle?
He's not very happy about. I don't know if he's dead.
Where is it?
Oh, there. Keep still, you. It's for something. It's just hard to.
Oh yes, I can see it. Look, look on the phone.
No, you
Look at it.
What is it?
It's a beetle.
It's very big.
We think it's a dung beetle.
Do you think that's what it is?
Yeah, I think so.
It's the same actually.
What is it? It's smiling at me.
What is this? Cows?
Oh, there's a few more coming up, Tonia.
Oh, good.
What did it do?
They're all the same. Would they all be the same?
No idea.
Look at its tail. It's a little
They're like
baby
little-
girl. Should we go into your house?
So that's 2, 3, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. Little cow path that the badgers have not dug up.
I wonder if it's because there's nothing left.
Maybe because
Had
they
a bit
can
of a go. Yeah.
smell them or something. Oh, there is something in there.
I'll try and.
I'll come now and have a look at this.
We found a bug. Should I put it in the wide?
Yeah.
Look.
I need to go back to my house.
Why don't you take some pictures on my phone?
No.
So thank you very much to Tonia there. Hopefully that gives lots of people the enthusiasm to go out and dig through poo in their own fields, with or without a variety of sizes of helper. I thought the enthusiasm was great. So there's a few questions that kind of came up in the video. One of them, the first little wiggly maggots that you saw, I'm sure that Sally-Ann will correct me if I'm wrong here, but as far as I'm aware, those are fly maggots. So those aren't dung beetles. But the one that you saw at the end, the big chunky grey larva, that's a beetle larva, that's a dung beetle larva. So basically that's what your badgers are after. That's what your badgers, or I saw, John, you were saying that it's crows that go into your dung pats. Yes. Crows are really clever and they can turn over a whole cow pat and pick those big chunky larvae out from underneath. So yeah, that's what they're after. That's why they're doing a really good job. You can see from the size of that's a really good food source for a crow or a badger or whatever. I would say that the little beetle that you found isn't a true dung beetle. It was something that Sally-Ann mentioned earlier on in her video, and I'm going to let you explain because you do it better than I do.
So yeah, you're absolutely right, Ali. It's not a dung beetle. It is another beetle that lives in dung. It's a hydrophiliid, a water beetle, but there's a whole group of them that do not breed in water. They're now breeding in dung. And their larvae in particular are voracious predators of other insects, especially fly maggots and things like that. So they're an important part of the dung community. But rule of thumb is if you get something out of dung and it whizzes off your hand or it whizzes around the bowl you've got or anything like that, chances are it's not a dung beetle, it's a carnivore, it's fast, it's a hunting machine if you like. And if it's slow moving and often death feigned, so pretends to be dead, then it's more likely to be a dung beetle because they're herbivores and they're a bit slower off the mark.
I don't know if you wanted to comment, Sally-Ann, about the discussion about the wetness of the dung.
Yeah, so with the wetness of the dung, you know, your dung changes throughout the year anyway, because obviously your grass is wetter. One day you'll have wetter dung. Dairy cows tend to drink more and have other things. So, you know, it's wetter dung again. But you will find that where you have a splatter of dung, the dung beetles will actually drown in it. It's too wet and they will drown. When you're collecting dung and you're using the flotation method, by the way, you know, get those dung beetles off quick and then tip it away because you don't want to drown what you're trying to conserve there. But basically they will drown. And also, you know, their larvae is unsuitable habitat for their larvae because they need more solid dung to eat. And it's so flat. And if it's flat like that, then it dries out very quickly. It weathers very quickly. It becomes just a little thin crust. There's no protection. We were talking about the crows. You get lots of things that eat dung beetles. You get lots of your waders, your woodcock and your chough and all these sort of things will come along and probe. And if it's very, very thin, there's no protection for those dung beetles either. So a splatter isn't great. A good pile, a mound with ridges and things like that is awesome. So if you can get somewhere in the middle, you know, brilliant, happy days.
Tonia did later manage to find a dung beetle. I've posted a WhatsApp image in the chat. I think that would be a Aphodius fimitarius. I have to apologise for my pronunciation. I learnt dung beetle ID from a Spaniard, so my pronunciation is very bad. Yeah, I think that's quite a common dweller type dung beetle. So one of the slightly smaller ones, but the bigger end of the smaller one, if you see what I mean. So I've posted Tonia's image of that in chat if anyone wants to have a look. We're running a little bit low on time, so I'm personally very happy to stick around in this session if other people are, to continue taking questions. But there have been a lot of questions and a lot of enthusiasm for learning more, for learning about ID and all of those sorts of things. So yes, I will definitely make sure that we find a way of sharing our videos so that you can look back at them or make use of them, share them further, that sort of thing. Hopefully I'll be able to do that through the central conference system. But specific questions in terms of tips on where to go to learn about ID, I will turn to Sally-Ann.
Yeah, so there are different sites that you can get information from. There's going to be a new farming site coming up soon, or farming-based site, website. Bruce, what is the name? That's really bad. I can't remember the name. But you can also go online and there is a Scarabodia recording scheme as well. But you know, people do not worry if you can't identify these things to species level. They are incredibly hard. I've been studying them for years, and I need microscopes, as you can see behind me. And you know, don't overface yourself and think, oh, I can't do this ID thing. They are difficult. A lot of them look very similar. However, if you can just tell which one of the three groups you have, and if you have a red one, a gold one, and a black one of this group, then you know you've got 3 species. You know, that's pretty good going as well. You know, they are quite hard to tell apart. Bruce, tell us very quickly the name of the website that's shortly going to be coming live.
Dung Beetles for Farmers.
Brilliant.
Snappy, like it. So when I share the videos, I'll make sure that we share a list of those sorts of websites and other resources that people can go and check on too. I noticed a question at the bottom: is there a particular time of year when dung beetle community is most diverse? When's the best time to rummage through poo? I would say that the two peaks are sort of May-ish, August-ish, you know, give or take, seasonal weather, etc. That's when there are more species about, and the best thing to do would be to go at both May and August, because you get some early species that you'll find in the May like the May visit that you won't find in the August visit, and the same applies the other way around. Any other tips on going and hunting for them, Sally-Ann?
Yeah, so basically, you got to think of a dung pat as not just one whole habitat. The different layers of the dung is also inhabited by dung beetles at different stages of decomposition. So you might have something, Granaris, that actually likes the dung when it lands on soil. It doesn't like dung when it lands on grass, and it lives in that interface between soil and the dung. So you would find them where you get poaching actually around your water troughs and around your gateways. You will find a different type of dung beetle in shaded areas under a tree, in the out around a hedge or something like that in a wooded area, if you're doing agroforestry grazing or something like that, than you would do if you were right out on a sunny southern facing slope, say. So even when you go into your field, you will see one big habitat, but actually these are lots of little micro habitats, and you will find different dung beetles in different areas, hopefully. And if you are finding different dung beetles in different areas around your dung, then your diversity is excellent, well done. So yeah, when you're going out to look at them, you know, the flotation technique is brilliant because it just shows everything. And just remember to release them quickly, but go around and check those different areas. Bear in mind about that different areas. If you're doing flotation, try and dig up a bit of the soil underneath the dung as well, because there will be dung beetles in that little bit of soil underneath.
I noticed that there's a question in here for Bruce that says, Bruce, do you run a virtual course on breeding dung beetles, and have you got a website where we can book? Careers out of this.
If there's money involved, then yeah. No, I haven't. No, it's all work in progress. I'm certainly no expert, so it's all trial and error with it at the moment. So we're seeing how it's going anyway. Yeah, there's a lot of complications and a lot of learnings in it. So yeah, we'll see how it goes.
There's clearly a lot of interest between our audience here in learning more. So, you know, maybe we can wangle ourselves all a job out of this. Do you want to join us as well, Tonia? I actually wanted to ask Tonia, as a first-time dung beetle explorer, how was it? Was it hard? You know, I mean, I realised that doing it like this, so receiving sort of general ideas of guidance by WhatsApp isn't necessarily how to train anyone to do anything. But how was it for you? How did you find going to find dung beetles?
It's frustrating with the badgers because I had to cover the cowpats up with gorse and thistle so the badgers couldn't get there. And then they came and removed some of them anyway. So I was short of cowpats, but it's really interesting. I will do it again and take more notice. And we don't dose, well, the cows, we only use poron as they come inside in the winter. They don't have any other treatments. So I think our cowpat should be quite good, but the sheep are treated with wormers, etc. And I've never seen any beetles in the sheep poo, and I'm going to discuss this with my husband and son. I'm sure they will not be amused, but yeah, I think it's a really interesting way of starting to look at the whole ecosystem.
I've just seen a really nice comment, a couple of really nice comments coming in from people saying about this being a great session and let's get it out to more farmers, and thanking everyone for all that you do. That would be you guys, not me. So I'm directing that to you on behalf of our dung beetle community. I'm directing that to you and all of the other sort of nature-friendly dung beetle interested farmers. I don't know if he's still around, but I know we did have a vet in the audience who's also interested in this sort of thing from a vet's point of view, which I thought was a new area that I hadn't looked at. I came into this from the ecology side of things, and then found out how useful dung beetles are, and then I've got just more and more inspired. So I'm grateful to Sally-Ann for many years now of cajoling and encouragement, but it's been really interesting talking to you and Bruce, and then to share the experience with Tonia. So before we reach our sort of 3 o'clock bell, I just wanted to say thank you on my behalf and the Dung Beetles' behalf to my fellow speakers, and to Rachel for managing the tech, which it turns out my internet connection isn't good enough to do. So thank you very much. So yeah, if there are any more.
I was going to say thank you, Ali, for bringing us all together today for this as well, and giving us the opportunity to talk about dung beetles and our experiences and things.
I should definitely say this was all Sally-Ann's idea. So if it's all gone horribly wrong, blame Sally-Ann, not me. Yeah, if anyone has any more questions, you know, as we're sort of finishing the formal session, you know, feel free to unmute yourself and ask instead of typing in the box if you want. I'm going to try and keep a record of the questions that we've got so that we can share more detailed answers as well.
Hello. Can I ask?
Ooh, that's feedback.
Yeah, because I have 2 computers. Better. I sent a but I think he's in the car and he couldn't pick up my message. So he probably talk about this in his video, but as I am not native, it was difficult for me to pick up. What is the purpose of that big holes that he has in the field, where he lived like a cylinder and we could see a lot of beetles there? If he can answer.
That's Bruce. Bruce, that's yours, isn't it?
Yes.
I'm going to have to own up to that. Yeah. That's me. That's what they call a pitfall trap, and it's for catching beetles. So our farm is fragmented, and we're seeing different species, and what we're trying to do is move them around a little bit. That's one way of capturing beetles, to bring them from one farm to another. And it's kind of experimental, to be honest.
So yeah, Bruce was saying that's a pitfall trap. So for academic purposes, for going and surveying dung beetles, I also used a pitfall trap method. It wasn't quite as fancy as Bruce's. Mine was a series of plastic pint cups dug into holes in the ground. Student budget. I will point out I didn't drink out of the cups. You're breaking up a bit, Bruce.
Oh, Bruce, we lost you. I was pot noodles when I first started as well, pot noodle containers, so yeah.
So basically what I was doing would be dig a hole.
5 years of age.
I was digging a hole, put the pitfall trap in the ground, put a mesh on the top, and deliberately deposit some dung there. So I knew where the dung had come from. I collected organic dung. I knew where it had come from. I knew how old it was, all of those sorts of things, so that I could replicate exactly the same thing across lots of different sites. It meant going out, setting these, going back 5 days later and collecting them. So it's an academic way of doing it when you've got a bit of a travel budget. But if you're just going to look at your own community on your farm, then the method that Sally-Ann's used is probably, well, it's definitely easier and less investment of kit in the first place. So yeah, that's what those tubes that were on Bruce's farm were about. Are there any more questions that anyone wants to ask, or shall we call it a day and I'll work out where to share information? Oh, we've had a very long message from our vet. I can't read all of that quickly. We might return to that. We might reply to you by text, Rob, if that's all right.
Ali, I was just going to say, we have Lancaster University and Food Futures. We have like a little exhibit space on Kiko Chat, which is one of the rooms you can go into. And I'm just setting it up now. And if you want to, we could have a tab that's about this session with the dung beetle videos. And maybe I could copy some of this chat into it as well, so that people, because obviously people have gone and like, there's a lot of enthusiasm for it. So it'd be great to give other people a chance to see it.
Yeah.
I'll have a chat to you about that.
Yeah, we'll work out how to do that.
Brilliant. Well done, Ali.
Definitely a team effort, which is really nice. And thank you to everyone for joining in and investing in time in questions and putting up with tech issues and stuff like that. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Oh, what was that one? There was an interesting question. It quickly flashed up on my screen and disappeared again. What was that one?
We haven't really covered nutrient cycling yet. Would be great to have a session on that too.
Oh yes, yeah. Dung beetles are pretty important to that one as well. So yeah, we have looked at the things that dung beetles do, as in I think we've concentrated quite a lot on pasture fouling, but there is a whole host of things, and obviously nutrient cycling is a majorly important part of what dung beetles do for us, very much so. Well, not just for us, that's rather humanist, but yeah, definitely. Ali, there's very little evidence and research on seed dispersal for dung beetles in the UK, is there? But there is an awful lot in the tropics, so it could be something that's happening here. And also with dung beetles and microcosmium fungi, soil fungi, and things like that, that plants obviously need to help really take up those nutrients released. There's not much published research in that at the moment, but again, this is a whole area that can be explored.
And another area I kind of stumbled on down in Adelaide was there was a group of farmers down there being paid for storing carbon in their soil, and what they were doing was they were feeding biochar to dairy stock, and they were using dung burying beetles that they were introducing to bury the dung pats then with the biochar into the soil, and they were measuring the carbon levels in the soil, so they were actually getting credited for this. Yeah, so there's potential there as well.
Yeah, I've just seen a comment from someone asking when the session will be up online. So we were just talking about hopefully being able to put up some of the links to some of the content on the central conference system. I know that the full videos of sessions will be shared as soon as possible. I don't know exactly when that will be. I think it's a case of people like me that recorded a session, sending it to the conference organisers and then them sharing them. So hopefully that won't take too long, but we should be able to get the basic content from this session up, as Rachel suggests, sooner rather than later.
Yeah, Ali, I can show you quickly. I'll show people where it will be. If you want, I can share my screen again. But in the next day, because I'm still trying to organise everything, it's all got a lot. So yeah, on the Kiko chat page, you're probably getting familiar with, there's this side bar with the different rooms on, and Lancaster University and Food Futures, because we've helped kind of sponsor the event, we've got a space in it, which is at the moment quite empty, but I'm in the process of filling it, and there'll be different tabs. So we can have a tab on here with the dung beetles session and the videos on, potentially to share it within the conference space. But I know that the conference organisers will be sharing stuff as well. But yeah, so in the next day or two, maybe we can get it up into this space here, the sponsor showcase, because obviously Ali, you're at Lancaster Uni, linked with Food Futures.
I hope that will help with sharing things and making things accessible. Yeah, we'll try and include links to where you can find information about ID, if there are ID guides available, those sorts of things that you can download. We'll try and share some of those links as well as the videos from this. But clearly the the video content we've shared today has gone down very well. So I see Sally-Ann's disappeared, but Sally-Ann and Bruce, I'm very grateful for your input there. I think that's been a really, really good overview as to what it means to go and search for beetles. Bruce, I don't know whether you're still in the car and whether you'll be able to answer this, but did you say that you were applying tar and eucalyptus oil or something to your cows to help to protect them?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, in order to prevent fly strike. So we would get summertime mastitis if we didn't do something. So the typical way we've done it in the past was using a product, a deltrametrin-based product that it is an insecticide basically, and it can persist in the dung pats for quite a long period of time. So what we've done is moved away from it, and we're using my wife's radiator roller that she's missing, and using it to paint on Stockholm tar onto their teats, while also pouring on eucalyptus oil on their back, onto their backs. Now, the efficacy of that is completely dependent on the weather, obviously. So the more rain you get, the more often you're going to go with it. But I suppose controversially then to that, the more rain you get, the wetter the weather, and the less likelihood of having flies. So I suppose that the longer it lasts, is more weather is more conducive to having dung flies. So yeah, we get anywhere from a week to about 3 weeks out of an application. It's not much fun putting it on, admittedly, but you know, you kind of learn to get someone else to do it on the farm, and and it works. So that's it. Yep.
I've never heard of that one. I like the idea that they're going to the health spa and getting essential oils and skin treatments. I quite like that.
Yeah, my accountant was kind of asking me questions about these essential oils appearing on my end of year accounts. They were they had to put a strong case to revenue for me using products from the soapery on the heifers.
Were you not like suddenly looking 20 years younger or something, Bruce? Is that not the question?
Yeah, I'm actually 58.
Oh. It's really interesting to hear like the different perspectives on alternative treatments. I know that Sally-Ann's been experimenting with how much she can avoid treating lambs, and whether there's there's talk of having sort of no-go zones, essentially, where you treat animals with your traditional veterinary drugs, and then you manage that land carefully and those sorts of things. So it was interesting to see your manually applied treatments, shall we say. I think most people have sort of headed off. I'm halfway through writing a reply to Indigenous I can't pronounce that, Pastoralism Institute. So I'll reply to that, but then yeah, hopefully we'll be able to share more information on the central site, and that will be useful to everyone.